A student once asked anthropologist Margaret Mead for the earliest sign of civilization in any given human culture. He expected the answer to be related to tool making, maybe a fish hook, a grinding stone, a clay pot, or perhaps language. Her answer surprised him. Mead said she believed the earliest sign of civilization was a healed femur. The femur, of course, is the thigh bone. In a society based on hunting and gathering, a person with a fractured thigh bone would be unable to care for themselves and would be useless. Mead explained that no healed femurs are found where the law of the jungle, the survival of the fittest, reigns. Someone with a broken femur would simply be allowed to die. But a healed femur showed that someone cared. Someone had to hunt and gather food for the injured person until the leg healed. Someone had to provide care for the person who could not care for himself. She said, the evidence of compassion was the first sign of true civilization. Compassion isn't just the first sign of civilization, it is central to what it means to be a follower of Christ. Compassion for others is the evidence of Christ in the life of the believer. The challenge for us in this modern world is to be compassionate as Jesus was. In speaking of Christ the King, whose feast we celebrate today, Pope Francis said, the starting point of salvation is not the confession of the sovereignty of Christ, but rather the imitation of Jesus' works of mercy through which he brought about his kingdom. The one who accomplishes these works shows that he has welcomed Christ's sovereignty because he has opened his heart to God's charity. The biblical image used today to represent Christ the King is that of the Good Shepherd. In the Old Testament reading from Ezekiel, we get a picture of what the Good Shepherd does for us. If we stray from the fold and get lost, he seeks us out and brings us back. If we get sick or injured, he heals us or binds up our wounds. In other words, he looks after us with tender care and concern and compassion. In the New Testament reading, we see the reverse side of this picture, namely, what the Good Shepherd expects from us. 4 times, the parable of the sheep and goats repeats the actions which God requires of the just, drumming these simple, basic expectations into our heads. Feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, welcome the stranger, clothe the naked, comfort the sick, visit the imprisoned. Well, today, counting this homily, you heard it 5 times. And if you add bury the dead to the list, we have, of course, the corporal works of mercy. Today's gospel leaves no question about the prerequisites for entrance into the kingdom. While Jesus walked on this earth, compassion pervaded his life and his ministry. He reached out to the despised and the detested, to prostitutes, to lepers, to tax collectors. He healed the sick and the handicapped. He associated with outcasts and the marginalized. As children of God, who St. Paul calls the Father of compassions, and even more so as disciples of Christ, we are called to reach out in care and love to those who are in need in the world around us. Our compassion is to be like God's compassion for us, not vapid sentimentality, but rather a love that emerges deep from within our heart and reaches out to all others. A love that transforms the prejudices, the biases, the compassionless attitudes so widespread in our world today. St. James writes, "If a brother or sister is poorly clothed and in lack of daily food, and one of you says to him, 'Go in peace, be warmed and filled,' without giving them the things needed for the body, what does it profit?" Today's final reflection comes from Pope Francis concerning the first World Day of the Poor, celebrated last Sunday. He says, "Little children, let us not love in word and speech, but in deed and in truth." These words of the Apostle John voice an imperative that no Christian may disregard. The seriousness with which the beloved disciple hands down Jesus' command to our own day is made even clearer by the contrast between the empty words, so frequently on our lips, and the concrete deeds against which we are called to measure ourselves. Love has no alibi. Whenever we set out to love as Jesus loved, we have to take the Lord as our example, especially when it comes to loving the poor. So says Pope Francis. Today, we will encounter Christ in the flesh in the Eucharist we are about to receive. We will encounter Christ in the flesh in the faces and persons of our brothers and sisters, especially the most vulnerable and powerless. Let us not fail to recognize and respond to these encounters.